I really firmly believe that great stories are everywhere, but the opportunity to share them isn't necessarily as widespread as we would all like it to be. So the question for the panel really today is, how do we help bring out those incredible stories and formats in Unscripted from the region? And I wanted to start just with a bit of context for the audience, really, of how a project comes to you, at what stage you see it, and what you look for that would make you excited to move forward with that project. I'm going to start actually with Dana. That's right.
Well, sure. So it is very complicated, and this is an industry where it's good to have had something produced already. So it's not, as you said, Haley, it's not all fair, and it's not an equal playing field. But I think, first and foremost, being in markets like this, having the opportunity to speak to people who have done it before, that you can attach yourself and work with creators and producers and distributors and sales agents and anybody that can help you take your project forward is extremely important. And this is a relationship business. Creativity is important, but you can't undermine the importance of a relationship. And getting out there, meeting people, telling them your ideas, following up, maintaining things that you are starting in places like this, or any kind of relationships that you're starting is very, very important. For me personally, I mean, stories are great, but I would say that I always bet on the person and the passion and the uniqueness of their voice and making sure they're resilient enough to go through this, because this is hard and it takes a really, really long time. On average, a series takes a minimum of 5 years for when you have your idea to when you're hopefully, on screen, and it can take much longer. So when I attach myself as a producer to anything, I want to make sure that the people I'm heading out there with realize that, that they're not calling me every week to say what's new, because things don't happen that quickly. But also on their end, when they're asked to do work, also to know that they're taking those notes in and that they realize this is a conversation that needs to be had. So first and foremost, I do look for a passion and a great person, and then of course the story.
Fantastic, thank you. And Leo, how about you? At what stage would you see a project, and what would make you feel like this is something for Better to acquire or co-produce?
So at our company we have kind of two departments, co-production and acquisition, and I work for acquisition. And but the goal of both departments are to find so-called glocal shows, like local shows which can travel globally, and it's kind of specific art, specific type of shows, which has to have specific characteristics, as scientifically said. So they have to be at one side local and work locally and some specific territory, but they don't have to be too local. So, like they have to be understood in other countries, in other cultures, and that's why. It's quite very important so the storytelling of the shows is quite important, because it doesn't have to deal with very, very local things which only audience of this territory could understand. And we work, as I said, I work for acquisition, and basically if you do acquisition, you just acquire a show and then you sell it and then you make money with it, but this is kind of the perfect situation. It happens, but not all the time, and usually we work very tight with the producers on a creative level. For example, we very often do recuts of the shows, and we do so-called international versions, which sometimes are shorter than the original versions, but at the same time, these international versions work globally. And so our acquisition is not a classical acquisition, it's kind of acquisition / co-production. This is what I do, and my colleague Anna, who is in charge of co-production, she basically does the same thing, but on the script level. So she works with projects which are on the can be at the very beginning, and she tries to do the same thing I do in the post-production. She tries to do it during the development, and. Yeah, so it's the difference between two departments. So, and that's why for me, when I'm looking for the shows who at least already financed. It doesn't make, because that makes sense. Then I can be sure that the show will be made and then acquired. So this is what we do.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I'm going to get you in a second, but I just wanted to develop that just for a moment, because I did chat with your colleague Anna ahead of our session, and I know, just to speak to Dana's point, one of the things she said she looks for in a project for Better to get involved is for the storytelling to be really authentic, for it to not feel like a copy of some other show that you've seen, for it to come from a really personal perspective. And we had a chat about this, Leo, about kind of the changes that you would look to make in post-production to make a show more exportable. Can you just speak very briefly about what some of those might be, like the pacing of it, or...
So what, sorry?
What kind of changes would you make in post-production?
Okay.
Like changing where the story starts in the first episode, maybe?
Usually, we're talking about praxis. Usually it's always about the first episode. Usually, because at least, well, I work mostly with the Eastern Europe, and the challenge about Eastern Europe is always doing the proper pilot episodes, because people in Eastern Europe are very creative. They have brilliant ideas, and they also can make stories, plot it, but very often they're not very good at selling the shows. Don't talk only about pitching. Basically, the pilot is also kind of you sell the show, we sell show with the pilot. You show the pilot, and this is how you sell it. And if pilot doesn't work, people don't want to buy it. And it's great then, I know, episode 3 or 4, where the story finally takes off, but it's too late, because if pilot's episode doesn't work, nobody would watch the episode 3. So basically, usually it's about the pilot. So we had a show, for example, which was brilliant, like genius idea, well produced, and but we said, yeah, but we have to recut the pilot episode. At the end, we had a show like original version, 16 episodes, and international version, 15 episodes, and then we sold the 15 episodes version. The same, and sometimes we had shows like where we acquire on the at the pre-production level, but we already see that we would need international version, and we sometimes even put it in the contract that we're going to do an international version which will be shorter than the local version. So this is what we can do, but there are other things which I unfortunately can't do with the characters and so on. So the other things that can be challenging are kind of in Eastern Europe, there are not a lot of shows with strong female characters. And unfortunately, that's a problem which I can't solve in a post-production, because you can't change the sex of the main character. But this is what you can do on development, and this is what we do in the co-production department.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think that's a really helpful insight into that phase. Coming to you, Dennis, obviously you're in the unscripted space. So can you talk a little bit about how ideas are generated in Zigzag, or how projects kind of grow and develop to the point of, taking that show or idea to a commissioner?
Sure. The thing is, in order to write either script for me, Zigzag, write it scripted or unscripted format, you have to watch a lot of TV. That's full stop, to see what's all around. And I always share, when I say watching a lot of TV, so at least know what's happening on the TV, not necessarily spending hours. people go exercise yourself. I'm not behind so you have to watch TV all the time. But the thing is, there are literally two options that you have in terms of like when you go to making something which is yours. It is things that you admire. That means like all good masterpieces, either scripted or unscripted, that you love to see and you really like to watching day in, day out, week in, week out. And that is it. They're there for a reason, they're special. You can't make another Godfather, say, oh, I'm going to make Godmother, or whatever it is. You're not going to make another X Factor calling it XX Factor.
Well, unless you come from a family of gangsters and your grandmother was a godmother, then we're very interested.
Okay, put it this way, I can, but nobody else can. No, but seriously, it is, yeah, you're right. So it is stuff which you desire. So it's literally watching it and kind of admiring these things. And the stuff, it is not as good, you're watching, say, oh, you know what, in this documentary or in this movie or this drama, I would change A, B, and C, or they didn't do this. Aha, you're having your ticking brain on. You know where the faults in your eyes are, and that's how you're going to sharpen your skills to make your script better, to introduce it to the end user, or who is going to be producer. So copy and pasting, it's not very good and successful ideas. If you think, oh, I can make another, as I said, XX Factor, it's not really called X Factor, and doing the same. Be original as much as, I know it's easier said than done. Try to persuade your ideas, be behind it, be confident, but not necessarily stubborn. Listen what other people from the industry, professional people might be able to tell you. Be selfish and take 10% from each conversation you're going to have. And you're going to sharpen up your script in order to process it and say, aha, I'm ticking my boxes and I'm ticking the boxes which there might be need for the production.
I want to follow up on what you just said, and I can't underestimate enough how important it is to be a savvy television viewer. And really knowing what is working, what isn't working. Not just to know where to position your project in a conversation, but also there's a mechanism to it. And as much as we're not encouraging you to copy ideas, on the contrary, bring your own experiences, bring things that are unique to you, that is your voice. But it is also helpful to look at the mechanism, and especially if there's a great show that you like the way the storytelling is done, seriously, sit down, break it down. See when characters are introduced, when storylines are introduced, what information is given, what is withheld. Really use that as a blueprint of sorts to make your writing and your technical writing better. But inspiration, as much as you can bring in, I would say, from yourself or from the world that you know well, especially as you're starting out, that's your unique selling point. That's what we're all looking for.